I live in a one-bedroom cabin tucked between two hills in southern Vermont. There's a wood stove in the corner, an old rifle above the door I haven't touched in 10 years, and silence so pure you could hear snow melt in the spring. I chop my own firewood. I fix my own roof. I mind my own business. No one here knows who I used to be, and I prefer it that way. Every morning starts the same. Black coffee. No sugar. No cream. Just bitterness earned, not added. I sit by the window as the sun crawls through the pines, and I read the news on a secured tablet I never updated. Half of it's lies. The other half is what they want you to believe. That morning, something changed. There was a package by my door. No return address. No stamps. Just my name and handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade. My mother's handwriting. Inside was a formal invitation embossed in gold. You are cordially invited to attend the commissioning ceremony of 2nd Lieutenant Lena Morgan, United States Army. Folded behind it was a handwritten note. If you choose to come, Caleb, please dress appropriately. It's her day. Let's not cause confusion. I stared at it for a long time. That was her way of saying, don't wear the uniform you're not supposed to have. I almost laughed. Almost. I hadn't spoken to my family in nearly 7 years. Not since my father called me a disgrace in front of 6 officers, at a retirement banquet I wasn't even invited to. Not since my mother handed back a birthday card I mailed for her unopened. Not since Lena stopped replying to my letters altogether. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I had outgrown anger. But what I hadn't outgrown was the ache, the kind that shows up when you're stacking firewood alone in winter and wonder if anyone would notice if you didn't come back inside. Lena, my little sister, the one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunder, the one who begged me to come back from West Point and teach her how to march like the cadets. Now she was the one in uniform, polished, decorated, celebrated. And me, I was a story that stopped being told. I set the invitation on the table, poured another cup of coffee, tried not to feel it. But then I noticed something else. Tucked into the envelope almost by accident was a sliver of cardstock, an old photo I hadn't seen in 20 years. Ghost River. My old unit. 6 of us. Sand-covered boots. Eyes too young for what we knew. And behind the photo a slip of encoded numbers. At first glance it looked like dust, but I recognized it immediately. Field-level encryption. A handshake code from a channel that should have been dead. Someone was trying to reach me, and they used my family to do it. I sat back in my chair watching the photo curl slightly under the heat of the stove. I hadn't planned on going anywhere this month, or this year. But maybe it was time to let the ghost out of the woods. I was 22 the last time Lena looked at me like I was somebody. It was the 4th of July, back when we still gathered as a family, back when folding flags and firing blanks in ceremony was considered sacred, not just symbolic. Our dad stood in uniform on the main stage of the local Veterans Parade. Mom held the microphone as the town choir sang the national anthem. Lena was 10. I was home on a 2-week break from West Point. Nobody asked where I had been before that. Nobody asked why my name had been removed from the Cadet Honors Board. They just told me not to wear anything that would draw attention. I showed up in a plain shirt and khakis, sweating in the sun, standing behind the bleachers while the ceremony played out. Lena spotted me halfway through. She slipped away from the group and ran to me, red, white, and blue ribbons bouncing in her braids. "Why aren't you up there?" she asked, pointing to the stage. "You're Army, too. Shouldn't they call your name?" I smiled the way soldiers learn to smile, tight, brief, and convincing. "They don't call everyone's name, kid." She tilted her head, trying to understand. But Daddy said, "You were smarter than all of them. That you made captain in half the time. That you were in some secret unit like spies in the movies." I paused. That part was true in a way. But the truth wasn't something a 10-year-old needed to carry. Sometimes the people who do the most don't get called, I said. Sometimes the people who don't get called choose not to be. She didn't fully get it, but her eyes darkened just a little. It was like a seed of doubt got planted, one that would grow silently over the years. Then she asked the question I couldn't answer. If you're not bad and you didn't quit, why doesn't anyone salute you? I remember that moment more than any battlefield, because nothing I had trained for prepared me to answer that. Not for her. I crouched to meet her eye level and whispered, "One day, you'll understand. And when that day comes, if no one else sees me, you will." But time is a cruel editor. The more years passed, the more her memory revised me. Her letters got shorter, her replies more formal. Eventually they stopped. I couldn't blame her. When the world around you rewrites a story enough times, you start to believe the new version. You stop trusting what you felt as a child, and you start listening to the adults who speak louder than the truth. Now that same girl would be standing on a stage, a second lieutenant, sharp, saluted, everything I wasn't allowed to be, at least not in public. I wondered if she'd recognize me at all, or if she'd only see what she was told to see. The question still lingered in her eyes back then. Why doesn't anyone salute you? And deep down, I had never stopped hearing it. I stared at that photo for over an hour. The heat from the stove made its corners curl upward, like it wanted to peel itself away from the past. 6 of us stood shoulder to shoulder in the sand, dusty, sunburned, defiant. Ghost River wasn't a real unit on paper, but we were real. Real enough to be sent where maps ended and deniability began. Of the 6, 4 were gone. 1 disappeared in Mexico under a different name. And me, I'd buried my uniform so deep it might as well have been fiction. But the numbers etched faintly on the back of the photo weren't fiction. I ran them through a secure decoder I hadn't used in a decade. Still worked. The algorithm was my design. What came through wasn't much, just a ping a handshake from a dormant network node that should have been permanently decommissioned. It was like a ghost breathing through a keyhole. Someone had found something. Or someone was watching. Either way, they wanted me to see it. But they hadn't messaged directly. They used the one method guaranteed to cut deepest my family. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a message. I turned the invitation over in my hand again. Gold leaf edges, a timeline, a location, and a warning dressed up as politeness. Please dress appropriately. Let's not cause confusion. I knew what they meant. Don't come in uniform. Don't show your face in public with symbols they can't explain. They wanted me quiet, palatable, non-threatening. I could have ignored it, tossed the whole thing into the fire like I had, with every promotion offer, every buried commendation, every second chance dangled in front of me with strings attached. But this time, something shifted. Not anger, not pride, just clarity. They thought they could write me out of the family story, erase me from the bloodline, and no one would question it. And maybe they were right. But they forgot one thing. You can't delete someone who never stopped watching. I packed light. 1 bag, civilian clothes, a faded ring I hadn't worn since the desert. I tucked the photo and the decrypted code into a weatherproof pouch and slid it between the lining of my jacket. No uniform, no medals, no name tag, just me. I locked the cabin, fed the last log into the stove, and stepped into the cold. As the morning frost kissed my breath and the trees stood still around me, I whispered something only the woods could hear. Time to see if they still remember I exist. I left before sunrise. The sky was still a bruised gray when I pulled onto Route 7, my bag in the passenger seat, and a half-drunk thermos of coffee wedged between the console and my knee. I hadn't slept much, maybe 2 hours if I was lucky. My mind kept playing a reel of things I hadn't thought about in years. Faces, orders, the sound of a man breathing his last word into my earpiece. The road stretched out like a scar, long, straight, familiar, in a way that made my stomach tighten. I hadn't been back to Georgia since everything fell apart. That state wasn't just a place, it was a wound I left open. And yet, here I was. I told myself I was going for Lena, that some part of me still owed her a presence, even if it wasn't welcomed. That maybe just standing in the back, anonymous and silent, would be enough to prove I was still part of this bloodline, even if they had redacted me from it. But the truth was messier. Part of me wanted to be seen, not applauded, not forgiven, just seen. Noticed, acknowledged, named. That was the ugly part I hated to admit. The small, flickering piece of ego still clinging to a name that had been unspoken for too long. I drove past old service stations' diners that hadn't changed their menus in 30 years, military billboards faded by rain. Every so often, I'd pass a convoy of young soldiers in uniform, fresh boots, hard eyes. None of them looked at me twice. And why would they? I didn't look like one of them anymore. No ribbons on my chest, no scars they could see. Just an aging man with too many secrets and not enough daylight left. At a rest stop in Pennsylvania, I stood in front of the mirror for the first time in weeks. Really looked. The lines around my eyes, the stiffness in my neck, the tiredness that never left. I practiced saying her name, Lena, just once out loud like I was rehearsing it for court. It caught in my throat. The last time I said it to her face, she was 19 and full of fire, screaming at me that I abandoned the family, that I made our parents ashamed, that I chose cowardice over legacy. I didn't argue then. I didn't defend myself, because silence was easier than explaining the truth to someone who was still too young to know what truth costs. But now she was standing on that same path, wearing the same uniform, earning the same praise I once threw away like a grenade, with the pin still in. And I was headed straight back into the blast radius. Part of me wanted to turn around. The other part wanted to walk straight into the center and stand still just to see who would notice when the smoke cleared. They called it Ghost River because it didn't officially happen. No mission ID, no medals, no graves with names that matched the manifest. Just a code name whispered through encrypted channels and a target that kept moving every 6 hours. I was 31, fresh off a promotion I hadn't asked for. They said I had a mind for patterns, like I could see 2 steps ahead of chaos before it unfolded. Maybe they were right. Or maybe they just needed someone who didn't ask too many questions. That mission was buried before it even began. All we were told was this: 6 civilian hostages, high value, time-sensitive, urban conflict zone, objective extract or eliminate the threat. No names, no nationalities, just the coordinates. Mosul 2008. I led a 6-man unit. We were tight, closer than brothers, because out there, trust wasn't emotional, it was survival. You clear a room wrong, someone dies. You blink during a breach, someone doesn't make it back. We moved in under nightfall. 2 hours and the intel began to rot. The building was wrong. Hostages weren't where they were supposed to be, and the street we were supposed to use as an exfil route. It had been barricaded for days. Someone had fed us outdated coordinates, or worse, deliberately wrong ones. But by the time we confirmed the breach site, we were already too deep to pull back. I made the call. We hit the target building. Short, burst, coordinated breach. We found the hostages shaken but alive, strapped to pressure triggers and surrounded by secondary explosives. It took everything we had to disarm the setup. But just as we began exfiltration, a secondary blast collapsed the neighboring complex. Civilians inside, some injured, at least one dead. Maybe more. I never got the real number. The footage never aired. The file never surfaced. And two of my men, Ellis and Grant, never made it out. I carried Ellis on my back for 7 blocks under fire before I realized he'd already bled out. His last words were, "Was it worth it? I still don't know." Afterward, we were debriefed in a hangar that didn't exist on any map. Reyes, the intel officer assigned to Ghost River, handed me a revised version of the mission log. He said, "It's better this way. Less noise, less inquiry. Let the story be clean." I asked him what happened to the civilians in the collapsed complex. He looked me in the eye and said, "Collateral doesn't get medals, Caleb. It gets forgotten." That was the moment I understood. They didn't need heroes. They needed shadows. And I was good at disappearing. Too good. So when they offered me the deal, wipe my name, bury the mission, live under clearance, or die under rumor, I nodded. Ghost River was never mentioned again. Until now. People think silence is a choice, but most of the time it's a negotiation. You give up the right to speak in exchange for peace. You bury the truth so the people you care about don't have to carry it. And over time, they start thinking you were never part of the story at all. I used to believe I chose this silence, that it was some noble sacrifice I made so others could sleep at night. But the older I get, the more I wonder, did I choose silence, or did I go quiet because no one was willing to hear what I had to say? I tried once, just once. It was 2 weeks after Ghost River. I flew back stateside under a different name, sat in the back of my father's study, while he cleaned his service rifle same as every Saturday. I said, "We lost 2 good men. The mission was compromised." He didn't even look up. Just said, "Then I guess you should have planned better." I remember blinking, thinking he must have misunderstood. But then he added, "This family doesn't make excuses. If you screwed it up, own it and move forward." That was the moment I realized he didn't want the truth. He wanted distance. Not long after, Mom started correcting people at church when they asked about me. "Caleb. Oh, he dropped out of West Point. He's doing something quiet now. Nothing like what Lena's doing. No bitterness in her voice. No malice. Just erasure." They needed a version of me they could explain. A version that didn't complicate the narrative of discipline on her legacy. So I gave it to them. I stopped sending updates. Stopped correcting the record. Stopped showing up. Silence was easier. Cleaner. Like a controlled burn in a forest, devastating but efficient. But here's the thing they don't tell you about silence. Eventually it stops protecting people. It starts protecting lies. And the more space you leave, the more others fill in the gaps with their own stories. That you quit. That you failed. That you couldn't handle the pressure. That your silence means guilt. And maybe I let them believe that because part of me felt like it was true. Maybe I blamed myself too. Not for the mission going wrong, but for not stopping it sooner. For trusting the wrong man. For making the right call too late. But if I keep living in that version, the real story dies with me. And there's one thing worse than being forgotten. It's knowing that the people you bled for still think you were never worth remembering. That's what I carried on the road south. Not regret. Not rage. Just the weight of all the words I never said, because I didn't think anyone was listening. Maybe it's time I spoke, even if it's just once. Even if it's only to say, you don't get to erase me. Fort Benning hadn't changed much. Same guard booth with the faded pride and purpose sign. Same heat that pressed against your chest like a warning. Same smell of cut grass and shoe polish and history that forgot your name. I parked far from the main lot near the back of the chapel, where the asphalt was cracked and the paint on the lines had long since faded. I didn't want anyone to see me arrive. That wasn't shame. That was instinct. I walked in alone. No uniform, no ceremony, no name tag clipped to my chest. Just a pressed gray shirt and combat boots that had seen more sand than concrete. The auditorium buzzed with pride, the kind that has no space for ghosts. Families in coordinated outfits. Fathers with chests full of ribbons. Mothers with camera phones ready and trembling hands. Kids too young to know what the salute really meant squirming in stiff shoes. And then there was me. I slipped into the last row third seat from the end. No one turned. No one gasped. No one whispered. But I felt it. That intentional kind of silence. Not because they didn't see me, but because they did. They knew who I was. I watched Lena's classmates file in with mechanical precision. Their shoes hit the floor in perfect rhythm, their spines straight, like someone had ironed the pride into their backs. And in the middle of it all, Lena. Her hair pulled back tight. Chin lifted just enough to say, "I earned this." She looked like everything they wanted me to be. From where I sat, I could just make out the outline of my parents in the front row. My mother wore navy blue, the same shade she wore at my West Point induction years ago. My father sat upright, legs crossed, hands folded over his knee like a man watching a legacy he helped build. Neither looked back. Not once. It was like I'd been excised from the photo, cut clean and forgotten. I scanned the room for anyone, an old instructor, a family friend, hell, even a janitor who might give me a nod of recognition. Nothing. That's the thing about being invisible. It's not always the absence of sight. Sometimes it's the deliberate refusal to acknowledge your presence. I adjusted in my seat, leaned slightly forward, and let my fingers rest on my knee, just close enough to feel the ring tucked in my pocket. I didn't need to wear it to remember what it meant. Lena took her seat on stage. She didn't look toward the back, not once. But something in her posture, rigid, rehearsed, a little too perfect, told me she knew I was there. Or maybe I was projecting. Maybe I just wanted her to know that I showed up, even when they didn't want me to. Even when my name wasn't printed in the program. Even when I was the only man in the room who had bled in silence and returned with no applause. I sat there third seat from the end and let the world pretend I wasn't real. Just long enough for the next act to begin. The master of ceremonies stepped forward, his voice echoing through the high ceiling like a hymn. Today we celebrate not only individual achievement, but the continuation of a legacy, one forged by discipline, sacrifice, and honor. I'd heard speeches like this before, same cadence, different uniforms. Then he said her name. Second Lieutenant Lena Morgan, United States Army. Applause exploded, a wave of noise that swelled toward the stage. Flashbulbs sparked, chairs shifted. Pride filled the room like smoke, thick and sweet, almost enough to choke on. She stepped up to the podium with the poise of someone who had practiced that moment for years. Her uniform was flawless, every pin perfectly placed, every thread ironed sharp enough to cut doubt. She looked like a Morgan, like our mother, like our father, like everything the family believed in. And then she spoke. I stand here today as a product of tradition. She began, her voice, clear, calm, controlled. My father served with honor. My mother in cryptographic intelligence. I was raised on duty, discipline, service. The crowd nodded, visibly moved. That kind of generational pride plays well in rooms like this. She continued. Even my brother, he once walked the halls of West Point, a brilliant cadet. I felt something tighten behind my ribs. Not pain exactly. More like an old bruise being pressed. She paused. Just a breath. Just long enough to let that line settle. But he chose a different path. One I didn't fully understand at the time. A polite chuckle from somewhere near the front. The kind that says, "Families are complicated, aren't they?" I didn't move. She didn't say I was discharged with honors. She didn't say I was recruited into black ops. She didn't say I commanded a team that saved 6 hostages and lost 4 brothers in a mission that doesn't officially exist. No. She said I chose a different path. And in that moment, I was no longer a soldier. I was a footnote, a cautionary tale wrapped in euphemism. The applause didn't resume after that part. Just a pause. Just silence. And then she picked up again, seamless, smiling, polished. I could see it then. The script. The training. The quiet pressure not to disrupt the image, because legacies don't have room for loose ends. And I was the loose end that didn't get clipped in time. She ended with a quote from Eisenhower. Something about responsibility and restraint. The crowd loved it. They stood when she saluted. And I remained seated. Not in protest, not in resentment, but because standing would have meant I accepted the version of the story she just told. And I hadn't come all this way just to be erased again. I waited until the anthem ended, until the crowd began to shuffle and chatter and smile into each other's phone cameras, until the air was thick with congratulations and the scent of cheap cologne and metal polish. Then I stood slow and quiet. No one noticed. That's the thing about being left out of the narrative it makes, slipping away easy. I walked the side aisle toward the exit, my boots nearly silent against the tile. My jacket felt too warm now. My collar itched with the sweat of something deeper than nerves. As I reached the double doors, I caught movement in my periphery. A man, mid-50s, broad shoulders, clean-shaven, the kind of posture you don't learn you earn. He was working the reception line, probably a superior officer, shaking hands and offering firm nods to parents who beamed like campaign posters. But then he stopped. His hand froze in mid-shake. His eyes scanned the room as if drawn by some radar that pinged only once. And when they landed on me, he didn't smile, didn't blink. He just stared. A moment passed, maybe less than that. But I felt it in my spine. Recognition. Not certainty, but something close. Like a memory surfacing through murky water. He tilted his head slightly, just a notch, the way people do when they're testing an old hunch. I didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't break stride. But my fingers brushed the outline of the ring in my pocket, instinct, not habit. We held eye contact for no more than 2 seconds. But it was enough. He knew. Or he almost did. And I knew exactly who he was, too. Everett Locke, Commander, Special Operations. Retired. One of the few who'd walked into Ghost River alive and walked out with a file sealed tighter than any grave. Back then, I was his superior. Now I was just a man in a gray shirt slipping out the side door of a room that didn't want my story told. He didn't follow, but he didn't look away either. I stepped out into the sunlight, the heat wrapping around me like a question I wasn't ready to answer. My eyes adjusted. The noise of the crowd dimmed behind the thick doors. And as I reached for my sunglasses, I caught my reflection in the glass, small, distant, unadorned. For a second, I almost believed I didn't exist. But then I thought of the way Locke had looked at me. And I realized some ghosts still cast shadows. I didn't plan to go to the reception, but my feet had other ideas. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some bitter desire to see how far the narrative had drifted. Or maybe I wanted to know if anyone in that room still remembered who I was without being told. The reception hall was dressed in green and gold streamers. Tables lined with finger food, arranged like a military parade, orderly, excessive, performative. There were banners, too. One said, "Congratulations, Lieutenant Morgan," in vinyl letters so large they stretched across 2 pillars. I hovered near the back. Didn't take a drink, didn't sit. just watched. Lena stood surrounded classmates, junior officers, proud parents. They clinked glasses, told jokes, took pictures. I caught my mother in profile smiling with the kind of precision only pride can produce. My father was near the buffet talking to a man in uniform, both nodding with the slow certainty of men who believe their legacy is intact. No one turned toward me, and I had no intention of making them. Then I heard the door, a heavy metallic thud that cut through the sound like a blade across velvet. Everything paused just slightly. He entered like someone used to being watched. Not flashy, not loud, just undeniable. Everett Locke. He hadn't aged well, but he'd aged honestly. Same shoulders, same eyes, same unreadable stillness beneath his surface. He didn't look around, didn't scan, didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward me like he'd been walking for the past 15 years and had finally reached the end of a classified map. He stopped just a foot away. We didn't speak. He looked me in the eye, searched, measured. And then, without a smile, without ceremony, he stood at attention and saluted. A formal, full salute. No hesitation. No wink. No casual nod masked as respect. The room hadn't gone silent, but I felt it shift, like air being sucked inward before a storm. Someone dropped a glass. A fork clinked against ceramic. And suddenly heads turned. My mother froze mid-sentence. My father stiffened. Lena across the room blinked once slow, deliberate, as if her brain needed a second to catch up with what she was seeing. I didn't move, didn't return the salute. Just stood there, letting his hand hang in the air like a flag no one thought would ever be raised again. And then Locke spoke. Voice even. Calm, but loud enough for anyone near us to hear. Sir, if that's really you, then the rumors were wrong. They didn't bury you. They just couldn't find you. I didn't smile, didn't answer. But for the first time in 17 years, I felt the weight of silence shift in my favor. And I realized, maybe ghosts don't have to haunt. Sometimes, they just have to be seen. You'd be surprised how fast a room full of confident people forgets what to say. The moment Locke's hand went up in that crisp, unmistakable salute, the volume in the reception hall dipped not into silence, but into that dense hush where people pretend they're not staring, where forks hover mid-air and laughter dies mid-throat. I didn't move. I didn't blink. And still I felt the heat of every glance turning toward me like searchlights. Lena was the first to freeze. She stood near the dessert table holding a small paper plate of fruit she wasn't eating. Her smile dropped, not in shock, but in confusion, like her eyes were translating what she saw faster than her mind could explain it. Then her head tilted just slightly. Recognition. Behind her, a junior officer whispered something. She didn't answer, just kept staring. My mother was next. She stood at the edge of the circle of officers, hand still wrapped around a champagne glass, fingers clenched tight enough to fog the crystal. Her back straightened, like someone had called her to attention. But her face, that wasn't pride. That was fear. The quiet kind. The kind that only comes when something you thought you buried stands up and breathes. My father didn't speak. His eyes never even met mine. He just looked down at his napkin. The same way he used to when I came home unannounced. The same way he looked the day I told him Ghost River went sideways and 2 men never came back. Avoidance for him was armor. And right now, he was fully dressed. Someone near the buffet whispered, "Wait, is that Caleb Morgan?" Then another voice. I thought he didn't. He wash out. And then Locke, still saluting, dropped his hand slowly, respectfully. He turned slightly to the growing cluster of officers and said louder this time. This man served under no name, commanded men whose graves were never labeled, made decisions that saved more lives than you'll ever know. You may not recognize him. But I do. A ripple passed through the room. People stepped aside. Some looked down. Others kept staring like I was some myth come to life, a name their parents once mentioned in hushed tones. No one clapped. No one said a word. But I didn't need applause. What I needed was already happening. They saw me. Fully. Undeniably. Not the version my family edited out. Not the myth. Not the failure. Me. For a long moment, nobody knew what to do. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I was completely, impossibly, undeniable. Not because I demanded it, but because truth, when spoken out loud in the right voice, doesn't ask for permission. It just stands there. Unshaken. I stepped outside. The air hit colder than I expected, even in Georgia heat. The kind of chill that comes from leaving behind a room full of ghosts, still pretending they're alive. I stood beneath a modest oak tree near the parking lot, where the laughter from the reception couldn't quite reach. My hands were in my pockets, thumbs brushing the edge of the Ghost River photo folded flat against the lining. I thought I'd have a few minutes alone. But then I heard her boots. Lena didn't stomp like she used to when she was angry. She walked with control, now measured, rehearsed. But the pace was too fast to be casual. I didn't turn around until she spoke. Why didn't you ever tell me her voice was lower than I remembered? Not fragile, tight, restrained. Like a thread pulled taut just before it snaps. I looked at her. Really looked. Still had the same eyes. But now they held questions that didn't fit inside any training manual. I mean it, she said, stepping closer. Why didn't you tell me what you did, who you were? I let the question hang. Behind her, the sun caught the edge of her collar pin. Second lieutenant. So new the shine hadn't dulled yet. I could have said 100 things. That I was ordered not to. That the files were sealed. That my silence protected people, including her. But none of that answered what she was really asking. So I said, the only thing that was true. Would you have believed me? She flinched, not dramatically, just a subtle recoil in her eyes. Of course she began. But the sentence collapsed under its own weight. Because we both knew the answer. She had spent years listening to our parents' version of me. The dropout. The disappointment. The shadow. That version was easier to believe than the one standing in front of her now. You looked up to me, I said. And I didn't want you to spend the rest of your life doubting what that meant. She looked down at her hands. I would have listened, she whispered. Maybe I replied. But would you have heard me? The wind stirred a few leaves near our boots. Somewhere a car alarm chirped and died again. I didn't come here to take anything from you, I added. This is your moment. You earned it. She looked up, her expression unreadable, a blend of guilt and awe and something harder to name. I just needed you to know, I finished, that sometimes silence doesn't mean shame. Sometimes it's the last defense a man has left. She nodded slowly. But she didn't say thank you. She didn't say sorry. She just stood there looking at me like she was meeting me for the very first time. And maybe she was. I didn't go back to the cabin, not yet. Instead, I checked into a small motel just outside Fort Benning. Room 214, nothing fancy. Just 4 walls, thin sheets, and a lamp that buzzed like it was tired of being ignored. I set the lock, pulled the curtains, and opened the bag I hadn't touched since Vermont. From a false lining stitched under the base, I slid out a matte black drive, unmarked, encrypted, immune to amateur fingers. I booted up an offline laptop I kept under a dummy OS. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, no tracking, just code and ghosts. I'd received a silent ping 3 days ago, hidden in the metadata of the photo inside the invitation. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. It wasn't just a message. It was a trailhead. I followed it. The data led to a private mirror of a military archive, one that hadn't been accessed in over a decade. Buried beneath layers of obfuscation was a packet small stripped, but surgical. It contained redacted pieces of the Ghost River incident. The problem, the file hadn't been retrieved from the original encrypted logs. It had been scraped, ripped from a locked system, using an outdated authentication token. I ran a backtrace on the access point, and that's when the breath caught in my chest. The IP wasn't random. It belonged to a government-issued laptop assigned to a junior officer stationed at Fort Benning. The name on the hardware, IDL Morgan. I sat back. Not angry, not surprised. More like a medic staring at a bullet wound and realizing it came from his own side. She hadn't leaked anything directly. I knew Lena. She didn't have the training to bypass this kind of encryption. But she'd opened something. Somewhere she wasn't supposed to. Maybe in a classroom. Maybe out of curiosity. Maybe by accident. And someone had been watching. They waited for the door to crack just wide enough, then reached through and took what they wanted. Reyes. It had his fingerprints all over it. The timing. The method. The cruelty. He'd been the last man to hold that file before it disappeared. And now, years later, it resurfaces, piggybacking on my sister's digital footprint. I looked at the clock. It was past 1 a.m., but I was wide awake now, and so was the truth. Whoever dragged my name back into the light wasn't just hunting ghosts. They were framing one. I called her the next morning. No code words, no formal request. Just, we need to talk. Now. She met me outside the officer training center, still in uniform hair, tied too tight, like she needed structure to hold herself together. Her eyes looked clearer than yesterday, but something underneath had shifted, like the ground was moving, and she was trying to stand still. I didn't waste time. You accessed a file, I said. Her eyes darted, but not away inward, like she was replaying the moment in her head. It was during a strategy lab, she admitted. We were assigned a simulation on high-risk decision-making under fragmented intel. The instructor gave us access to archived case studies. She swallowed hard. One of them was labeled incomplete. The metadata was weird. No author, no summary, just a string of numbers. I opened it. I nodded. And did anything happen? Her silence told me yes. There was a delay, she said. Just a few seconds. The screen flickered and then everything returned to normal. I thought it was a glitch. I pulled out the printout I'd made from my laptop and handed it to her. This is what was taken. Redacted fragments from a mission no one was supposed to know about. It was extracted through your login, your clearance, your laptop. Her face went pale. No, I didn't. I didn't take anything. I didn't share. I know I cut in gently. But someone else did. You left the door unlocked, Lena, and someone knew exactly how to walk through. Her hands trembled slightly. Not like a child caught lying, but like a soldier realizing she'd walked through a minefield thinking it was safe ground. Was it about you? She asked, voice cracking. It was about Ghost River, I said. And yes, it was about me. She looked away, jaw tight, eyes glassy but holding, fighting not to fall apart. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know they'd use me to get to you. That's the thing about people like Ray, as I said. They don't need you to mean harm. They just need you to be convenient. The weight of that truth hit her harder than anything I could have said. She backed up half a step, then stopped herself. You think they'll blame me? She asked. No, I said. They'll blame me. They always do. But that's not the problem anymore. She blinked. Then what is? I looked her dead in the eye. The problem is someone just reopened a war I buried 16 years ago. And this time, they're using your name instead of mine. She said nothing after that. Just nodded. Once. Stiff. Slow. And left shoulders straighter than when she arrived, but eyes haunted, like she'd seen something that couldn't be unseen. She thought the enemy wore different uniforms. Now she knew better. The hard drive was wrapped in canvas and sealed inside a hollowed-out copy of The Art of War. Cliché, maybe. But sometimes the oldest tricks still hold the most truth. I hadn't touched it in 17 years. Hadn't even looked at the shelf where I'd stashed it behind layers of plausible deniability. The night Ghost River went quiet, I'd made a decision: erase myself and take every answer with me. But now, the questions were back. And this time, they had my sister's name stapled to them. I locked the motel door, drew the curtains, and placed the drive on the desk, like a relic from a war no one ever signed a treaty for. I plugged it in. No password prompt. No UI. Just a command line blinking like a heartbeat. I typed it. Echo dot. Split. Access. CMGR17. The screen flickered once, then opened like a scar. Audio files, mission logs, scrubbed coordinates, helmet cam footage partially corrupted but still intact, and one folder marked only with a timestamp, 020344. 9:47 Z. That was the hour everything went to hell. I didn't open that folder yet. Instead, I scrolled through the logs, stopping at the one labeled Debrief, Morgan Unfiled. I hit play. My own voice, younger, steadier, colder. This is Commander Caleb Morgan. Entry time stamped 72 hours post-operation. Objective: secure hostages from encampment in Zone Delta. Minimize civilian impact. Neutralize rogue handlers. Complication intel was wrong. Building 2 held more than hostages. It held 3 children. Locals. No IDs. When the breach was initiated, I gave the order. No time to verify. We took the room. We saved 27 lives. But the blast radius from the adjacent building. Pause. 2 civilian casualties. Not targets. Not threats. Just caught in the edge of a call I made. I signed off on the cleanup. I wrote the redactions. And I carried the names with me. I chose silence not out of shame, but because the truth didn't fit the report. I stopped the recording there. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a second, I thought about deleting it all. Again. But that would make me no better than the men trying to rewrite history with shadows. No. If someone was going to drag this past into the present, then I'd meet them there. Fully armed with truth, not vengeance. I opened the 10304.1947 ZID folder. Inside video stills, raw footage, satellite heat maps, and one unread file named victorletter.txt. That name. That ghost. Victor Reyes, the man who once served beside me, the man whose ambition always outweighed his loyalty. I clicked it open, scanned the first lines. And that's when I knew this wasn't just personal. It was planned, meticulous, and it had started long before Lena ever opened that folder. Reyes wasn't exposing the truth. He was engineering a fall. Mine, hers, anyone who had ever stood between him and the version of history he wanted to sell. I closed the file and reached for my phone. It was time to knock on doors, starting with the one I'd been avoiding for 17 years, my father's. It started with a map that didn't match the ground. Satellite imaging showed a square compound on the edge of a dried riverbed in southern Kandahar dust rust, and 5 structures that looked abandoned from above. But we had a signal. A weak, flickering distress pulse buried in the static of an old military channel pinging once every 19 minutes. The code matched a set of American hostages taken weeks before. Engineers, a field doctor, 1 child. I was the acting field commander then, 31 years old. Ghost River wasn't the name of the mission. It was the nickname my team gave it because of the comms, how they cut in and out, how nothing on radar ever held steady. Reyes was our intel officer. Sharp, too sharp. I remember him pushing for a delay, saying we needed full verification before breach. But something about his caution felt off. Too political. Too measured for men we knew didn't have hours left. I overrode him. At 1947 Zulu, I gave the green light. 4 teams. Or staggered entry. My unit hit the west wall. I remember the silence before the first breach, how even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then motion. We stormed in. Hostiles. Confirmed. A gunfight in a hallway barely wide enough to fit 3 shoulders. We cleared room 1-3 hostages found. Gagged, bound, but alive. Room 2 was booby-trapped. SSG Bell cut the wire a half-second too slow. He took the blast with his chest. I still hear his scream in the back of my ribs. Room 3. That's the one that changed everything. Intel said it was storage. Reyes's report marked it as cold. No life signs. But I had a feeling. I paused the breach, rechecked the layout. Something was off. The temperature readings were too even, too still. I ordered a manual entry. Quiet. Inside were 3 children. Afghani. No tags. No weapons. Just eyes the size of their palms, and breath shallow like they knew they weren't supposed to be there. I radioed for medevac. Ordered the rear team to delay the blast to the 4th wall. But it was too late. Reyes, who'd transferred to the rear, had already given clearance based on his own timing. The 4th wall came down in a controlled collapse. Mostly controlled. The children survived. But the adjoining building one we hadn't cleared yet held 2 civilians, a translator's wife and his teenage son. They died under 2 tons of steel and silence. Mission success. All hostages retrieved. 0 American casualties aside from Bell, who was later honored posthumously. And yet I couldn't unsee the woman's hand reaching out from rubble, or the way the boy had shielded her body with his back. I wrote the report, filed it under operational necessity. Civilian casualties collateral. Status within acceptable parameters. But I knew what those words meant. They meant erasure. I met with command the next week. They handed me a commendation and a warning in the same breath. You did what was needed. But the optics won't help anyone. They sealed the report under high clearance. Reyes disappeared 2 months later into a private defense firm. And I left the light. Not out of shame, out of clarity. Because the truth wasn't just inconvenient, it was combustible. I buried it just like they wanted, until someone dug it up with dirty hands and put my sister's fingerprints on the shovel. I always knew Reyes was ambitious, but I underestimated just how far he'd go to make sure only his version of the story remained. After Ghost River, I kept the field data hard, copies, redundant backups, things I wasn't supposed to keep. Not because I didn't trust command, but because I didn't trust men like him. Men who use truth the way some people use mirrors only to reflect what flatters them. The official report, what eventually got filed and locked under 7 layers of classified access, wasn't what I submitted. I realized that this morning. The Reyes version had all the right phrases: unverified intelligence, premature breach order, civilian fatalities due to command error. Only one name tied to those errors, mine. But there was no mention of his override on the blast timing, no mention of the children I'd found, or the conflicting satellite readings I'd flagged hours before. It was as if Reyes had edited the mission like a filmmaker cutting out the parts where he hesitated, where he misread, where he made decisions from behind a desk with no blood on his hands. He framed it perfectly. Me, the field officer who went rogue. Him, the prudent analyst whose caution came too late. But the final twist, he didn't stop there. He attached an internal recommendation memo to the post-op file, unsigned, unattributed, but unmistakably in his language. A damning suggestion that my decision-making had been emotionally compromised, citing past trauma and a pattern of insubordination. There it was. Not just a rewrite of the mission, a rewiring of who I was. The brass needed someone to blame quietly, someone to fade, not to fall. So they let the memo breathe, let it circulate just far enough. Not for court-martial, not for headlines. Just enough to erase the invitation to come back. And just like that, I wasn't a commander anymore. I was a liability dressed as a hero. I packed up left, the grid turned silence into armor. All while Reyes climbed, first into a black-budget consultancy, then into his own security firm, the kind that handles strategic cleanups and data sanitation. Now he'd resurfaced with my past in his hand, and my sister's name tied to the breach. I knew what he wanted. Not justice, not exposure. Leverage. He wanted to burn just enough of the truth that I'd stay buried while he posed as the man who unmasked a cover-up, a martyr of truth. But I wasn't going to let him control the edit this time. I still had the raw footage. Still had the files, the timing logs, the helmet cam, freeze frames, showing his order. Lit green before mine. Reyes rewrote history once. Now I was going to write the final version. One built not from spin or silence, but from everything he tried to bury with me. I didn't plan on sending the files. Not for me, not even for Lena, but for Belle's widow. For the children in that room. For the ones who never got their names in a report, just listed under unavoidable. I compressed everything into a cold little zip folder, labeled it something only someone from Ghost River would recognize, water under fire, 12C. It held the raw mission logs, satellite delays, timestamps of the breach Reyes's override authorization, and his metadata trails. I layered it with voice logs, my voice, yes, but more importantly, his. The truth didn't need a narrator anymore, just a push. I uploaded it to a secure node tied to an independent oversight archive one Reyes had no hands inside. I encrypted it with a one-use code. Then I scheduled it. Auto-release, 48 hours. Unless I canceled it manually, just in case someone decided to make me disappear before this was over. After it uploaded, I sat in the quiet for a long time. Just breathing. Listening to the sound of my own pulse. That old familiar rhythm like the countdown before a breach. Then I opened the lockbox, the one I hadn't touched since I walked off that desert base without looking back. Inside was the ring. Solid black, titanium. The insignia so worn down now it looked like a fingerprint. We didn't wear it for show. We wore it to remember who bled beside us. I hadn't worn it in 20 years. I told myself I'd moved on, that I'd left that part of me behind because silence was stronger than bitterness. But the truth, I was just afraid if I wore it again, I'd start wanting to be that man again, the one who gave orders, who carried lives and deaths on a clipboard and called it leadership. But today wasn't about going back. It was about standing up. For what we actually did. For what we actually lost. For who we actually were before people like Reyes turned it all into smoke and shadows. I slid the ring onto my finger. It didn't fit like it used to. A little tighter, a little heavier. Good. Let it hurt. Let it remind me. This wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. And I was finally ready to carry the weight of my own name out loud. The conference room smelled like recycled air and power. The kind of place where decisions were made with too many syllables and not enough blood. 3 men, 1 woman, all in suits darker than their expressions. No name tags, no introductions. Just eyes that measured everything, including how I sat, how I didn't reach for the water, how my hands were folded like I'd already been through this once before. The one in the middle finally spoke. Colonel Morgan, the review committee has narrowed this situation down to 2 options. Option 1. Full declassification of the Ghost River files. Your record will be cleared. Commendation reinstated. Reyes discredited. He slid a folder across the table, red tab visible. Of course, he added, the public narrative will still need Shaping. You may not get the version of truth you'd like, but at least it won't be a lie anymore. The woman to his left took over smoother practiced. Option 2. Everything remains sealed. In exchange, your security clearance is restored. You'll return to Strategic Command Advisory role off-book. Quiet, dignified, and useful. There it was. The bone they were willing to throw if I promised not to bark. I looked down at the folder. Not because I was tempted, just to give myself time to think. They thought they were being generous. But all I saw was control. One path dressed as glory, the other as survival. I didn't want either. I wanted air. I leaned back, let the silence grow thick. Then I said it soft, but clear. I choose the third option. Eyebrows lifted. Not surprise. Irritation. There is no third option, Colonel. There is now. I slid my own folder across the table. Thinner. No red tabs, just a flash drive tucked inside. It's scheduled for release in 40 hours. Oversight archive. Fully encrypted, triple authenticated. You shut me up. Now it goes public anyway. They stared. Not at the folder, but at me. Measuring again. You're leveraging national secrets for personal redemption. The older man asked like it was a trick question. I shook my head. I'm not interested in redemption. I'm interested in integrity. You want me to trust the system. Prove it. The woman frowned. What do you want then? Nothing, I said. Pause. Except for my name to mean what it used to mean when men like Bell died believing in it. The room went still. No one reached for the folder. No one confirmed or denied. But I saw the shift. The man in the middle nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. That was enough. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and turned to leave. Before the door closed, I added, You've got 40 hours. Use them wisely. Because I wasn't bluffing. I'd already lived 17 years in silence. This time, they could be the ones to sweat. I hadn't been back to the wall since Bell's funeral. Not because I didn't care. Because I wasn't sure if I was still allowed to. The Memorial Plaza just outside D.C. was quiet this time of morning. Pale light angled through the trees, cutting long shadows across the stone. The names shimmered faintly where the dew hadn't dried, yet etched in silence, not in glory. I found the corner they assigned to Ghost River. It was small. No statues. No headlines engraved. Just 8 names. Bell's near the top. Beside it, no plaque for me. No need. I wasn't one of the dead. I was something worse, the one who walked away. I pulled the photo from inside my jacket, the one we took the night before insertion. 5 of us. Dust on our boots, grins forced, but real. Bell with his sleeves rolled up, Vargas flashing the peace sign, and Reyes off to the side, already halfway detached. I stared at that photo longer than I should have, because for a while we believed. We believed what we were doing mattered. And when that belief cracked, it didn't explode. It just hollowed out. I reached into my coat pocket again and pulled out a small magnetic frame, something I'd custom-made years ago. I pressed the photo to the far edge of the wall just under Bell's name. Not official, not permanent. But there, a place marker for truth, a whisper among all the shouting stone. Then I stepped back, didn't salute, didn't kneel, just stood. Let the wind move around me. Let the silence stretch across the lawn. In my head, I heard their voices. Bell laughing at his own bad jokes. Vargas humming country songs off-key. Even Reyes giving orders with that clipped tone he used to think made him sound smarter. They were ghosts now. And I was still here because of them, not in spite of them. A family of the forgotten. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished stone. Older, weathered, but the same eyes. Still watching. Still listening. Still refusing to let memory rot into myth. When I walked away from that wall, I didn't look back. Not because I was done, but because they knew I came. And that was all that mattered. I was halfway down the steps when I noticed him. 4 stars on his shoulder, polished boots, pressed blues, no entourage. General Elias Harton. I'd only met him once 16 years ago behind closed doors when he signed the non-disclosure that sealed Ghost River under layers of bureaucracy. He hadn't looked me in the eye that day, but today he did. He stood at the foot of the memorial steps like he'd been waiting. Not tense, just present. I paused. He didn't speak. He just raised his hand in a crisp salute. No hesitation, no ceremony. Just that straight-backed, unblinking. I didn't return it. Not right away. Because for a moment I wasn't sure if it was real. After all the silence, all the omission, all the years of letting someone like Reyes write the version they were comfortable with, was this a salute of respect or apology? But maybe it didn't matter, because something about the way his eyes didn't flinch told me he'd read the files, the real ones. I raised my hand slowly, returned the salute. Not as an officer, as the man who buried those names in the dirt and carried their stories in silence long after the parade stopped. Across the plaza, I saw movement. Lena. She stood near the sycamore tree, not close enough to interrupt, not far enough to pretend it was coincidence. She was in civilian clothes, hair tied back, hands in her coat pockets like she was holding something she couldn't put down. Our eyes met. No words, no tears, just knowing. Maybe for the first time in her life, she was seeing me without the edits, not as the cautionary tale Mom used to whisper about, not as the ghost who quit West Point, just Caleb, her brother, the one she used to follow through the woods behind our old house asking questions I didn't have answers to. I didn't walk toward her. She didn't wave, but she didn't look away either. And in families like ours, sometimes that's louder than forgiveness. General Harden lowered his hand, nodded once, then turned and left, just like he came without announcement, without a single aide. No speech, no press, just a quiet salute in the open air. For the first time in 2 decades, I didn't feel invisible, not famous, not vindicated, seen. And I realized something as I turned down the path and passed the iron gate out of the memorial. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands still, raises a hand, and waits for you to raise yours back. A year passes quietly in Vermont. No parades, no hearings, no headlines. The snow here falls in thick, soundless sheets, like the world's trying to muffle itself one flake at a time. And for once, I don't mind the quiet. My cabin's small. Built it myself back in the 90s, when the world felt like something I could still outrun. These days, I don't run. I fix things. Fences, gutters. Radios too old to tune to anything useful. There's peace in broken things that don't pretend to be whole. I keep a fire going most mornings. Coffee's strong, bitter. Just the way I used to drink it on base before sunrise, when the only thing louder than my thoughts was the hum of the generator. No uniform now? No buzz cuts. Just worn flannel soft denim and hands rough from chopping wood, not writing reports. I talk to the locals sometimes. No one asks about rank or service. They know me as Caleb, the guy who helps shovel their porch when the plow forgets the turnoff. That's enough. I still get letters. Not from D.C. Not anymore. From Lena. Once a month, handwritten. Nothing dramatic. Just her thoughts, her training, a tough cadet under her command who reminds her of me stubborn and quiet. She never says sorry, doesn't need to. We found a new language, built on subtext and patience. One of her envelopes had a photo once, the 2 of us standing side by side after a leadership conference she spoke at. I was in the back, half cut off by the frame. She circled me in red ink and wrote underneath, Didn't crop you this time. I keep it on the fridge. Next to an old Ghost River patch, the color's nearly gone. I don't tell stories anymore. Not the old ones. Not unless someone asks. Because I've learned something after all these years. Silence isn't always shame. Sometimes it's just rest. And I've earned mine. The ring's still on my finger. It fits better now. Like it's settled into the man I've become, not the soldier I was trying to be. There's no vindication ceremony coming. No final chapter. Just this life. Unfolding. Day by day. And for the first time in decades, that's more than enough. It came in a plain envelope. No return address. Just the West Point crest stamped in faint gold. I almost didn't open it. But something in the weight of it told me it wasn't just paper. Inside, wrapped in a thin cloth and taped carefully to the back of a formal letter, was the nameplate I'd worn as a cadet. Morgan matte black on brushed metal. No scratches. No rust. Like it had been waiting. The letter didn't say much. Just a single paragraph from the commandant's office. After internal review and archival updates, we are returning this item to its rightful owner. Thank you for your service. Your contributions are no longer in question. No apology. No explanation. Just a name returned to its original owner. I held the badge in my hand and stared at it for a long time. It was heavier than I remembered. Not because the metal changed, but because I had. I drove to West Point 3 days later. Didn't call ahead. Didn't wear anything formal. Just a dark jacket, clean shirt, and boots that had known too much ground to ever shine again. Campus was the same. Stone and ceremony. Young cadets with tight collars and eyes still too wide. I watched them for a while, wondering how many would carry things they'd never be able to say out loud. I found the display wall where alumni photos and citations lined the corridor. And just like I remembered, there was a blank space near Class 2004, a small void where my name had once been etched on a commemorative plaque before someone quietly removed it. But today in its place, Caleb Morgan, Special Operations Liaison, 2006-2012, Undisclosed Campaign Honors. Distinguished Service Post-Class Recognition. It wasn't dramatic, just a name among many. But it was there. Not scrubbed, not redacted, just present. I stood there longer than I meant to. Not for the recognition, for the peace. Because this wasn't about being proven right. Not anymore. It was about not disappearing. About walking into a space that once erased me and seeing that the erasure had an end. As I turned to leave, a young cadet jogged past and paused mid-step. "Sir? Were you Ghost River?" His voice cracked a little on the name. I didn't answer right away, just gave a small nod. He saluted awkward, but sincere. Then he ran to catch up with his unit. I didn't salute back, didn't need to. I was already whole. And that moment, that was my ceremony. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where the clouds hung low over the treetops, and the air smelled like pine needles and old wood. I was fixing the fence again, same post that kept leaning south every winter. The rhythm of the hammer, the creak of the boards, it was all part of my new kind of peace. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Excuse me, are you a soldier?" I turned. A boy, 7, maybe 8, stood just outside the fence line. He had a red cap pulled too low and a toy truck clutched in his left hand. His right hand rested on the pocket of a camouflage vest. The plastic kind. I looked at him, then down at my own hands. Calloused. Splintered. Not trembling anymore. I smiled, gentle. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "You just look like you give orders." I almost laughed but stopped myself, because it wasn't the kind of question that needed correcting. It needed care. So I knelt, rested one hand on my knee. "I used to be," I said. "A long time ago." His eyes widened. In a war, I nodded slowly. Yes, but not the kind they show in cartoons. He tilted his head, thoughtful. Did you win? The question caught me off guard more than I expected. Win. That's not how I ever thought of it. Ghost River didn't have victors, only survivors, and some didn't even get that. But I didn't want to lie to the boy, and I didn't want to tell him everything either. So I said, I made it home. That's its own kind of winning. He nodded like that made perfect sense. My grandpa was a Marine. He's in a picture in our hallway. He never talks about it. I met his eyes. Sometimes silence isn't because we forget, I said. Sometimes it's how we remember best. He looked down at his toy truck, tracing the edge with his thumb. Are you sad you stopped being a soldier? I took a breath. No, I said. Because I didn't stop. I just changed missions. He blinked. What's your mission now? I glanced around. The trees, the mountains, the old fence post refusing to give up. Now, I said. Now I make sure the people who were forgotten aren't. He didn't answer, just smiled, satisfied with that. Then he waved and walked off back to wherever he came from, the truck bouncing at his side. I watched him go, not because of what he asked, but because of what he didn't. He didn't ask about medals, or ranks, or who was right. He just wanted to know if I was something. And I was. I am. Not because of the uniform I wore, but because of the names I carry quietly. The ones etched in stone, the ones whispered in the back of my memory, still marching beside me every step of this quieter life. That night, as the wind stirred through the pines, I sat by the fire and thought of what I would have told my younger self if I had the chance. Not about combat, not about betrayal, but about truth. That justice isn't a headline. It's living clean. Living with weight and not letting it break you. It's keeping your name even when others try to erase it. And above all, it's knowing that you are not what they said you were. You are what you chose after. That's the legacy no one can strip. That's the victory no one sees, except those who still walk forward anyway.